I guess we're ready to roll, huh? Okay, well, how nice to see you all here, and welcome to everyone that's joining us online as well. This is our third GW Medicine Bicentennial event. We've been covering several topics of general health interest that we have great expertise in here at GW, and that also highlights some of the important research and educational special sauces that you get when you come to an academic medical center for your care. That care that's informed by education and discovery and translational science. My name is Barbara Bass. I have the great privilege of serving as the Vice President for Health Affairs and here at George Washington University, as well as the Dean of our School of Medicine and Health Sciences here at GW. We, that academic enterprise, coupled to our vital clinical faculty practice, known currently as the George Washington Medical Faculty Associates, soon to be relabeled as GW Medicine, linking us all together, are really pleased to have you here with us today. And we really do believe that notion that, and it really is true, and I think our recent experience in the pandemic and cancer and in so many domains, that healthcare and patient care and medicine that is informed by that discovery process and by education, having learners in your group, really keeps everybody at the top of their game, and really lets us make sure that we're providing to our community, to our patients, care that is really at that leading edge, that cutting edge of medicine. That is what we want. We want our patients, all of our patients, across this great city, as well as across this fabulous national capital region, to have access to here at GW. This is a series of bicentennial events. That means that our School of Medicine and Health Sciences is actually 200 years old. We're celebrating that 200-year mark this year. That means that we were founded in 1824. And we are part of the original charter by which George Washington University, which was an act of Congress, in 1821 established the university. And shortly thereafter, a couple of years, it took us a little while to get the medical piece going, but the school launched in 1824. And since that time, we have been providing continuous education linked to clinical care, linked to science, especially in the last 100 years or so, and accelerated even more recently in these last 20 or 30 years by bringing, as we say, bench to the bedside, which is what we do at GW and in academic medical centers generally. So we are the 11th oldest medical school in the country. We're the oldest here in DC, and we are really proud of that 2 years of history and service, and really view that 200 years of foundation as what really will propel us for this next century of care as we begin our third century. It's pretty daunting when you think about it. I'm really privileged to be here during that period. Today we're moving to our third subject. This time it's going to be keeping your skin healthy and safe. And we have a fabulous person here to walk us through that concept of keeping your skin healthy and safe. And the reason we're doing this, many of you may be aware, I've become aware, that this is Skin Cancer Awareness Month. We know this is a very common form of malignancy, fortunately one that's readily curable and treatable. But certainly May is a good time to start reminding us that one of the most dangerous things that we live with, but we also just love the most, is the sun. And in May, it's when we all start getting out a little bit more. And so it's a good time to have a reminder about what staying safe in the sun and understanding how the sun is actually really good for us, though, in other ways. So we'll talk about some of that. But the other concept I think that's important, we hear a lot about the sun and skin damage and harm, but we don't often think of our skin as sort of a general indicator of overall health, but it really is. And today's speaker, Dr. Adam Friedman, who I already mentioned is the chair of our Department of Dermatology, is going to talk about our programs at GW, which really build on that concept of skin as an overall manifestation of health, and which really links to some of the ongoing vital research that helps our patients support healthy skin throughout their lifetimes over the decades of life that we want everyone to enjoy. So I think it's really important we all learn more about this. And so therefore, I am so glad to have you here, Dr. Friedman. And I know that you have been so involved in building a really just superb faculty. And in academic medicine, our faculty are just vital, both as care providers, as well as educators, as well as researchers. And I know you have a cohort in your department that does all of those things with remarkable success. And I will hear about some of that today.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and interestingly, Dr. Friedman wanted to structure this in a way of mythbusters. So we're going to talk about some of those things that you all may have thought about. I think this is, things you think are true about skin, but maybe aren't. So we're going to do some myth busting today with Dr. Friedman as our guide. The first one is about sunscreen. And the myth is sunscreen is bad for you, the chemicals, and it may even be bad for the environment. Is that something we should worry about?
Yeah, I think for me as a dermatologist, I worry about it because it's hard enough to get anyone to apply something to their skin once, twice, or multiple times a day. So I think adherence is hard in general. Then you throw information like this into the mix, perpetuated and glorified, certainly on social media, and it makes our job even harder to protect ourselves, our loved ones, and of course, all of you. And I very often I'll have patients say, oh, I heard sunscreen gets in your blood, sunscreen causes cancer. And I'll be honest, I'm like, yum, 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 this is gonna be great. This is gonna be so much fun to talk about this. But while there's a lot of great evidence going against that, supporting the use of sunscreen, their safety for us and for the environment, I have to take a step back because it's really important to acknowledge that regardless of that hour and a half I spend going through all the papers that I know about, because I love speaking about this on the national level, we still need to get to that point where someone's going to be safe when they go in the sun. I mean, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can go in the sun and be safe. And we do have sunscreen ingredients. There are two that the FDA recognizes as generally regarded as safe and effective, or GRACE, which is their kind of umbrella term, which are zinc oxide, titanium dioxide. So even if I give my greatest elevator, pitch of why that's not true, we have options that we know are safe that don't fall under these myths or misperceptions that still allow people to be safe. But where does this come from, right? Why do we see someone talking about sunscreen will cause cancer, sunscreen destroys coral reef? A lot of this is based on work done in labs, not in the real world. So from the bad for you perspective, there are several chemical sunscreen ingredients, and we have two categories. There's your chemical ingredients and your minerals. Those are your zinc and titanium. The chemical ones are easier to rub in, easier to formulate, but they get a lot of flack in the media. And there are a couple that have been studied in, for example, cancer cell lines, where you take in a petri dish breast cancer cells, and you throw some oxybenzone, which is a commonly used filter, and it causes them to grow faster. There are other studies where they fed this oxybenzone to rats, and they measured the thickness of the uterine wall and showed that if they ate oxybenzone, this could affect the uterus, and maybe there's a hormonal influence. Show of hands, who eats their sunscreen? Hopefully no hands, because that would be next month's mental health session. So that is where a lot of this came from. Now, recently, there were two studies that were put out by the FDA showing that you could detect nanomolar, billionth of a mole, this is a type of concentration of sunscreen in the blood if someone were to optimally apply sunscreen, which, by the way, no one does, multiple times a day all over their body. But correlation doesn't equal causation. They didn't show it causes cancer or is a hormone disruptor, but that was then translated, unfortunately, by the media into, oh, this is dangerous. And so I think it's important to understand, where do these concerns come from? What evidence really supports it? We can, I hope, all agree the sun, ultraviolet radiation, is a carcinogen. World Health Organization, everyone says that. Whereas this other information about, oh, sunscreen could be bad for you, is not necessarily validated, and we need to protect ourselves. But at the end of the day, there are ways to do that without having to fight an uphill battle.
Great, thank you. Well, I guess one of the other myths is that not everybody needs sunscreen. We live in a very diverse city in particular, but our nation in general has people of all skin tones. And, there is sort of this myth, perhaps, that people who have more melanin do not need sunscreen. What's the truth on this?
Yeah, I would say in the last couple of years, there's been a real effort to really undermine this myth that your skin tone alone, depending on your skin tone, can be enough to protect you. And yes, melanin is our defense mechanism to ultraviolet radiation. That said, for those who can tan, because I literally just set on fire when I go outside with this pasty skin, a tan is a sign of injury. You produce melanin. Your pigment will change its structure to defend you from the harmful effects of ultraviolet radiation. But when we think about even the darkest of skin tones, and there was this really cool study, granted, they took some liberties in the science world of trying to correlate a skin tone to an SPF. This is that number on a sunscreen that relates to how well a sunscreen can prevent burning. This is UVB protection. And even the darkest of skin tones in this study would only make it to about an SPF 13, which based on the FDA regulations would not be qualified to say that it can protect against skin cancer or sunburns and things like that. So regardless of skin tone, you need to use sunscreen. That's an easy thing to say. It's another thing to actually execute, because then we need sunscreens that can be easily used in all skin tones. So as we know, certain sunscreens you put on darker skin, it looks white, it looks purple. That's not going to fly. There needs to be a good cosmesis and purposeful design, which is certainly being worked on. But also, I could say this right here and now, the media can say it, but that message doesn't get in front of the right audience. It doesn't matter. A tree falls in a forest and no one hears it. If we say everyone needs sunscreen, but those at most risk, at highest risk, aren't hearing it, that's a problem. And so that's actually one of the things we've been dealing with at GW. Learn to Derm is a med student fueled, run, armed program that is doing just that. It's going into the community that may not hear this message, may not hear it on WTOP or NBC, to both assess the level of knowledge and understanding in those myths and misperceptions, but also to educate. And this program has expanded tremendously. Now it covers probably every skin condition you can imagine. These health fairs, which is the way it first started, now has about 27 to 30 booths, but it started with sunscreen misperceptions and skin cancer misperceptions, focusing in an area of DC, Ward 8 specifically, that 98% of residents identify as Black, and there's not a single dermatologist. So this took a village, not just med students and med students from around the area. So we were able to parlay this and bring in students from other institutions, but we partnered with every possible derm society you can imagine, as well as local stakeholders, council members, various agencies that are there to assist the population. And so we've done many of these at this point. We actually have one coming up soon, which I'll talk about in a moment. Really, really successful. I just want to highlight two key members, two former GW students, now doctors. They are dermatology residents, Dr. Sarah Milan and Dega Omar, who are making us proud out there in the wilderness of residency. But we actually have a call today to talk about our upcoming event. And this is an ongoing, evolving program that is even targeting schools. We now have a high school and middle school curriculum to educate predominantly on these myths and misperceptions and really provide ownership to the community to take care of their skin and also help others take care of their skin. Along the lines about education, your educational materials need to meet the audience. And a lot of dermatology resources, unfortunately, have really just one shade of that. Most of our textbooks historically would show skin disease only in lighter skin. And what that translates into, if you have a skin issue and you're looking online, you're Googling, and we've done several studies on this, and you see that skin condition only in lighter skin, you're going to say, well, this clearly doesn't affect me. I don't see anyone who looks like me that has this, and that's going to misdirect and lead to poor outcomes. And so all of our educational posters, handouts include images across the spectrum of skin tones. And these were pulled actually from an atlas we created here that was a multi-center, multi-city program that and pictured here is one of our former residents, Dr. Misty Alarian, who's now a Mohs surgeon in California. We created this physical atlas that puts pictures of whether it be acne to diseases I'm not even going to name, side by side, same location, but different skin tones, to really appreciate the beautiful diversity and spectrum of how even something as simple as acne can look different depending on skin tone. And we have an online gallery that's free to all physicians, and our hope is that people will use this when they're making a PowerPoint for whether it be first-year medical students here at GW or at the national and international level. So this is actually information about our upcoming health fair. It's going to be at the end of June. It's something really exciting this year that's new is that we're partnering with the American Academy of Dermatology, their Pathways program, which is a career pipeline program that pulls in high school students, early college students who would qualify as underrepresented in medicine. And it's soup to nuts, everything from how you put a CV together, how do you interview, what even is dermatology, and it's gonna culminate with all those students volunteering at this health fair so they can see dermatology and GW in action in that moment. But another thing, we talked about, we've been focusing only on sunscreen and prevention, but skin cancer is legit. The second, melanoma, the deadliest of skin cancers, second most common cancer and rising in women aged 15 to 29. This is not just for 60 and up. This is affecting everyone, and it certainly affects all demographics. This does not discriminate. And so with that in mind, with that education, we also need to be armed and ready to support those patients. And we have an incredible cutaneous oncology program here. Spoiler, it's not me. I don't like surgery. You don't want me to cut into you, trust me on this. But you want this guy to cut into you, Dr. Vishal Patel, who runs this program. And not only is he an incredible surgeon and educator, but he's an innovator. And he has led GW to being the primary and lead site for international studies evaluating targeted therapies for more advanced cancers. So, to your point, clinical care, education, research, he lives up to all of those, no question.
Okay, myth number 3, dermatologists hate all sun exposure. I know that can you tell us what does that mean? I know you don't hate it all, but maybe you use sun in other ways sometimes?
Yeah, so I think there's this misperception that dermatologists want everyone huddling in the corner of their home away from the window, having no fun, that, we're curmudgeons. But no, I think, one, you can enjoy yourself as long as you protect yourself with sunscreen, SPF 30 or higher, broad spectrum, protective clothing. But you alluded to something very interesting in that sometimes we turn what we're so against into something that's actually useful. And it brings up an important point about toxicity, right? So toxicity is not defined based on sunlight or ingredient. It's actually about concentration. So super toxic things can be made beneficial if used the right way. And so phototherapy is a very commonly used approach to treating a wide array of skin conditions, from psoriasis, eczema, chronic itch, even certain forms of lymphoma, vitiligo, the list goes on and on. But it's all about meaningful use. And we are one of the few centers that offers phototherapy, and we have, at any given day, we have multiple patients coming through. And I think there's something appealing to the idea of using something natural, which, get more natural than sunlight. But this isn't going out on your roof at 12 p.m. in the middle of summer and baking for 15 minutes. This is very tailored, specific energy, specific amounts of time. So when used correctly, even something like the sun, which clearly I hate so much, can be used to actually help people and clear conditions and keep them away.
Mm-hmm. Very cool, very cool. And that's a very wide range of skin problems.
Broad applicability, absolutely.
Very good. Okay, I learned a new word in this one. Slugging.
It's an awful word.
Slugging over a retinoid will improve irritation. And I think we hear a lot about retinol and retinoid in the cosmetic world and a lot in the consumer space. But is there a real value to these skincare products, and how do you best use them? But also this thing about slugging. First, let's tell us what slugging is.
I love the way you're saying slug.
Yeah,
it's like you could pick a better term to describe what this is. So in essence, what slugging, actually question, has anyone heard of slugging? Show of hands. A couple people. The people who raise their hands are on TikTok, clearly. That's where you get this from. So slugging refers to using a really thick moisturizer overnight on your skin, with the idea is you are keeping water in, keeping bad things out, but then if you're putting it on top of something like a retinol or retinoid, you're going to limit its irritancy potential, meaning it's not going to irritate you as much and may make it more effective. So let's start with the retinol retinoid. So these are vitamin A derivatives, going back to that whole natural perspective. If I was to be stuck on a desert island and only allowed 2 things, it would be a facial moisturizer with sunscreen and a retinoid. Retinoids, vitamin A, really address a lot of the things our skin already does. We have receptors inside our skin cells. We have receptors on immune cells that will respond to these binding in their active form and do a whole lot of amazing things for our skin. Regulate skin turnover, wound healing. It rebuilds collagen elastin. It builds up this material in our skin called glycosaminoglycan. Say that 5 times fast. Think cosmetic filler. That's what they're made of. So in essence, it's telling your skin to make all the good stuff. The problem is, if anyone's used one before, when you start them, especially if you don't use a tiny amount, but even then, it does cause some irritation. You're changing a lot, and just like we don't like change, our skin doesn't like change. You get retinization, so redness, peeling, irritation. And the idea is, okay, well, you've put this stuff on, and I smear my face with Vaseline, that will prevent that from happening. That is absolutely not true, because if you put a retinoid on first and then something occlusive, you actually push it in even more and you'll create more irritation. Forgetting even that these types of products, these very thick moisturizers, were not meant for the face. You want to use something oil-free, and it'll say that on the bottle. It'll say oil-free, facial, non-comedogenic, which means non-acne forming. These thicker things will block your pores and also can cause breakouts. So just say no to slugging, especially over a retinol or retinoid, but say yes to a retinoid if you ease in. Usually it's a tiny little dot for the entire face. I know that sounds crazy, but that is more than enough. And you want to ease in by going maybe every other day or every third day versus every night to begin with, because you have to get some degree of irritation for it to work. And yeah, just don't slug. It's pretty much that simple.
So are you talking about prescription retinols, or are you talking about over-the-counter retinoids?
So all the above. So, and that's a great question. So retinol is the inactive form. That's why it's over the counter, except there's a caveat to that. Adapalene, which is a prescription retinoid indicated for acne, was moved over the counter as a measure by the FDA to improve access to these medications, making them less expensive, but also not needing to go to a doctor to get one. But most of them are going to be these pre-retinoid forms that have to be converted by your skin to be active. And think about this, you put it on your skin, it's going through the different layers, it's interacting with a whole bunch of things. By the time it's actually converted, there's not a whole lot left, which is why they're not super effective. Whereas a retinoid is already the active form. These are prescription. These are definitely more potent, probably 1,000 times more potent than these retinols, but really should be used with the guidance of a trained professional, like a board-certified dermatologist. Or if you're thinking about these from the cosmetic perspective, someone like Dr. Soda, who's our head of cosmetic dermatology, in the same vein as Dr. Patel. I think as derms, we do some cosmetics no matter what we do, but I really don't do cosmetic derm. She's your gal. This, she knows from soup to nuts again, lasers, Botox, fillers, all that really great stuff that people want to hear about at parties. And I'm like, I don't do it. So I can talk to you about psoriasis, and that just clears the room. I mean, you'd think they want to hear about psoriasis. But yeah, we're very fortunate. We have and there aren't that many fellowship-trained laser surgeon here who probably can answer this question even better than I can, to be quite honest.
Okay, very good, Dr. Soda. All right, next, sensitive skin is a marketing tool. And you run into many people who say, oh, my skin is so sensitive. And certain times it's more sensitive than others. And clearly it sounds like the marketing world has kind of picked up on that.
Oh, yeah.
Is this a real thing, or what do we do here about this?
So you think based on the previous myths, I'd be like, this is a joke. But actually, this is quite real. And I think that it gets mixed up in a lot of those approved statements that cosmeceuticals use: age-defying, redefining, beautifying. And so because the products with which these are attached are over-the-counter products, often this is dismissed as a marketing claim, but also as a disease state on its own. It's like, oh yeah, you're sensitive skin, whatever, no big deal. It is a very big deal. And I don't think we've appreciated that enough, but that is something we're actually doing here. So let's first take a step back and think about what is sensitive skin. Is it a symptom of a primary skin issue like acne, rosacea, psoriasis, or does it happen on its own with nothing else going on? When you ask someone with sensitive skin, we'll describe it. They say, well, anything I put on my skin hurts. It burns, it stings, it tingles, it feels warm. There is this sense of hyperreactivity. You may see absolutely nothing, which I think is that invisible nature allows people to suffer in silence, because with the skin, you expect to see a change, and maybe you might see a little redness, but usually there's nothing at all. But I think because you can't really see it, it's usually a personal experience. It's often, to your point, oh, you're just being sensitive. That is absolutely not the case. And so we challenge that ideology here, and that this is a true thing, because any given week I have patients come in saying, oh, I have sensitive skin, I can't use anything on my skin, what do I do? And we actually received funding from Galderma, who also provided products in the bags that you are sporting now. And so we did the first, but also the largest international study across the globe assessing for who has sensitive skin. Is it just a symptom of a primary problem, or is it its own thing? But also we want to try to get into the meat of, well, what makes it worse? I think we mostly assume someone with sensitive skin will be worsened first and foremost by a cosmetic product. That they put something on their skin, it burns, okay, that's simple. Is that really true? But also, are there demographics that can help us predict who will have a higher risk for sensitive skin? So what we found is really startling. More than 70% of the global population claims to have some degree of sensitive skin. But even more impressive is 40% had no other skin issue whatsoever. That actually mirrors some older data, but we're talking about studies that are maybe 50 to 100 people. This was thousands of people worldwide. And in each country we looked at, the selection of those studied were a representative demographic of that country. So it's not like of the 1,000, it could have been a random sampling in one area of the country. We really worked to make sure we were representing the populace of that location. Also, we found that whole thing about cosmetics, not necessarily the biggest issue. Actually, temperature change was the biggest driver for worsening sensitive skin. So going from cold to hot, or even severe hot temperatures or cold temperatures, cosmetics dropped down substantially. So that really redefined what we thought about as things that make sensitive skin worse. We also found, and this is no surprise, stress and sleep, lack thereof, which I'm sure you and I can relate to, but no stress, clearly. We have the easiest jobs ever. These were big drivers and associations with worsening sensitive skin. But I think what was the most fascinating, that the darker one's skin tone, the more severe the sensitive skin was to be reported. And there is actually some biological evidence to support this. So now we've defined a very big problem. We know what drives it, but maybe there's some biological underpinnings that will help us come up with better products and even treatments for this. And this is just scratching the surface. I know derms love using that phrase, but we're really learning a lot about this. Even more interestingly, so in thinking about temperature and heat being something that makes this worse, I wondered, well, there's a condition called hyperhidrosis where people sweat well beyond what they need to stay, cool. Would these individuals have a higher risk for hyperhidrosis? Maybe for sensitive skin, and maybe there's some overlap and connection. And the answer was yes. We did this massive survey study, and you mentioned 70% before, 89% of people with primary hyperhidrosis have sensitive skin. And you could say, well, sweat's an irritant. They're sweating, that's why. They had sensitive skin in areas where they didn't sweat. So that really hones in on there's something going on with maybe the stimulation of the sweat gland that could unify these two conditions. And this is the first time this has actually been reported.
Very cool. Well, lots to learn, as always.
As always.
Okay. So next we're going to move on to the cannabinoids, right? CBD. And tell us about are there benefits here? What's the status of the use of cannabinoids?
Yeah, so a couple years ago, there was something called the Farm Bill that pretty much said that any product or anything that had less than 0.3% of THC, the funner cannabinoid, and don't pretend you don't know what that is, guys, like really. Oh, what's that? So if you had cannabinoids, so think about the cannabis plant has several hundred cannabinoids. THC probably is the most popular, but there are many that have no psychoactive effect. So the Farm Bill, in essence, allowed hemp or CBD predominant products with minimal THC to enter the marketplace and be legal. And all of a sudden, it was the Wild West. Everyone and their mother had some CBD product. There were, CBD-infused frappuccinos, shampoos, creams. And because I think the allure of this area, to your point, like, oh, cannabis, this is, we shouldn't think about it. We shouldn't say it's good, but maybe it's good. I would love to try it, but I don't really want to try it. I think because of that allure, these things sold. They flew off the shelves without really any evidence. And because of that rapid evolution, I think that we saw a rapid decline shortly thereafter, because after a certain time point, we have all these products not knowing what to choose in any quality assurance. Consumers get savvy. They're like, why am I going to waste my money on this thing that has no support? And I tried it, didn't do anything. And so this article came out, which I was pretty upset about, saying, goodbye, death to CBD beauty, CBD products. And I was especially upset because this this journalist quoted me from other articles, and so I reached out and said, it's not dead, I promise, and I will prove you wrong. And that's in essence what we're trying to do here. When we think about cannabinoids, first and foremost, everyone here is making cannabinoids as I'm saying you're making cannabinoids. And it was actually through the study of an illicit drug, THC, that we discovered that we have an endocannabinoid system. We make cannabinoids, not THC, but we make them to do a whole bunch of different things, from regulating cell growth, inflammation, sensation, mitigating pain, itch. We shouldn't continue to feel pain after an injury, but when there's a problem with our nerves or how those nerves work, you get perpetual pain. And so we learned a lot about our internal system. Once again, we are all making these cannabinoids right now. And so we've learned a lot about it. The problem is the data to support how to use, when to use, which way to use, that's really limited. And so we're really trying to fix this. And I really think that medical cannabis holds a ton of promise for dermatology, especially. A lot of the conditions we treat are itchy or painful, that piece alone. But a lot of things we do are for inflammatory diseases. And there's a lot of great cell-based data supporting how these actually work, because these plant-based ones, they bind to the same receptors, the things that tell our cells to do stuff, that the ones we are all making right now. And so one area that for me clinically, I love taking care of things that don't have a million drugs, that aren't the attention of the media or everyone wants to be on the podium talk about. And one of those is cutaneous lupus. So this is the skin form of lupus, an autoimmune disease where your body attacks itself, in this case the skin, but also many other organs. And there are things that can set this off, and we actually have very few treatments, though more are coming. Skin lupus is actually more common than systemic lupus, full body lupus. And based on patient reports, the skin disease is actually more alarming to patients than the full body disease that can kill them. But that's no surprise, because you can see skin disease. So using an endocannabinoid, one that, once again, you guys are all making right now, we were able to show that if we applied it to an animal model of lupus, and I don't expect anyone to be able to read immunohistochemistry in these pictures, but you can easily tell from one side to the other, there's a lot less color. It's a lot less entertaining on at least my right. So yes, the right up here, stage left, right. The intensity of those colors goes down. Well, those colors are not a good thing. Those are inflammatory cells. That's injury. With a topically applied endocannabinoid, we could treat cutaneous lupus, offering, if it ever comes to fruition, the first topically approved treatment for cutaneous lupus. But even more exciting, which we will have hopefully out very, very soon, currently under review, was a clinical trial with a specially designed CBD used to prevent DNA damage from ultraviolet radiation. Once again, I don't expect there to be any dermatopathologists in the audience. Are there any? Show of hands. It'd be funny if someone didn't. Like, oh, I see what you're talking about. But what you can see is that there's more brown on one side versus the other. That brown is a stain for DNA damage in cells. So in humans, we were able to show that by applying this topically, we could prevent DNA damage from an extreme amount of ultraviolet radiation. This wasn't, hey, go outside and lay in the sun. This was using a device that emits a very high level of energy of ultraviolet radiation, and we could prevent that DNA damage, insinuating that CBD could prevent skin aging from sun, even skin cancer. Obviously, a lot to work out, but really exciting stuff that we're doing here.
Could you say a little something about clinical trials in general, and how do you enroll people in clinical trials? How do you encourage people to participate? Not always easy. It depends on what it is. And we have a clinical trial unit run by Dr. John Silverberg, who actually writes a lot of the protocols for these clinical studies, so has been very involved in clinical research for many years. I think it really depends on the condition. That's why I like to focus on things that have nothing. So if you have a disease state that is extremely disabling, deforming, and you have a possible drug that's going to be indicated for that problem, which I think is validating to the patient in its own right, knowing that there's a drug for you. We're not just doing off-label, using things and trying them out. This was meant for you. I think it's a lot easier to recruit for those types of cases than like saying, hey, we're gonna cut into you and see if we can cause your skin to heal faster. But you'd be surprised
that even though I'm saying all this, how easy it is to recruit and how I think patients and community members want to be part of the solution. Along those lines, I'm going to kind of go on a tangent. There is this misperception that certain communities, because of their mistrust of physicians, don't participate in clinical trials, which is one of the reasons why clinical trials often aren't diverse. You look at the demographics, and it's like 89% Caucasian. And that's a problem because we need to generalize the data from these studies to say, I will know if I give this to any patient that X% of patients will respond this way. If you don't have a diverse study population, that's not going to happen. We just published a study showing that this idea that, oh, well, it's mistrust. We're not going to bother trying to recruit certain demographics. That's not it. It's that they don't even know these studies exist. It goes back to how do you communicate? How do you think about how do you get that information out there about the study, recruitment, having doctors even talk about it? And we found is the majority of those folks we asked, they said if they knew about clinical trials and they had a way of getting there and they knew about the whole story, they would willingly participate. And so I think we can't make assumptions because it hurts everybody. It's more about how do you recruit everyone and be purposeful rather than just go with the flow and go with what's easier.
Yeah, of course, very good. It's how we advance the therapies we have
Absolutely.
available to all. So very good. Okay, here's one. If it sounds too good to be true, I bet. There's so much that you're doing in the department, but give us some examples of things that people will say to you that you just say, oh no, please.
I think skincare is wrought with this. I think with an organ, the largest organ, of course, that is visible. And I'm not talking about skin, hair, skin, and nails. Hair especially defines us. It's our crown. People judge us based on appearance. There have been countless studies showing that individuals with acne, hair loss, are less likely to get a job. Are less likely to really go out and have a really robust social life. Skin disease is extremely disabling. And so I think that it's very easy to pull those folks in with promises that will change their life. And so a lot of over-the-counter products, while they are governed by FDA, they can use certain language that doesn't make biological claims or drug claims that sound really incredible. Will improve the appearance of hair loss in just 24 hours. Hair grows about this much a month. I don't know if that's really possible. So I think a big piece of this is just being let down by false promises, but this can actually be dangerous too. And we just saw a great example of this in the last month with fake Botox or Photox or No-Tox, whatever you want to call it. But 22 individuals around the country were hospitalized with botulism-like symptoms because they tried to get discount Botox, which was not Botox, and it harmed them. And this is still an evolving story even weeks later. And I was actually on a flight to chair a meeting in Europe when I got a call from a reporter asking me about this. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. There's no way that someone would try to undercut the system and produce something that could hurt people, but also that people would fall for it. And unfortunately, because of, I think, the stressors that culture and society place on all of us, people look for the easy way, rightfully so. And in this case, people were harmed. And so I and actually Dr. Soda were involved in a lot of education to the community about how to make sure you're not getting the fake Botox, that you're not going to be put in harm's way. And full disclosure, it's safe to get Botox. I know there should be a sigh of relief right now because the Botox from the makers of Botox, Allergan, this wasn't a contamination issue. It was actually some, no good doers making fake Botox that can easily be identified if you look at the box. So it is still safe to go out there and do it. It's more about being purposeful and thoughtful and also going to a reputable source, going to a board certified physician or a licensed practitioner. But I think it's a good rule, not just from a safety perspective, but also just from an investment perspective. You work hard for your money. You put time into using these things. Make sure you're using something that actually is going to have an impact. Goes back to the desert island mentality. Retinoids to me are the best topicals, if you can tolerate them, that will have the greatest bang for your buck. Plus, of course, sunscreen and moisturizer.
Very good, very good. Well, the skin certainly is our most visible organ. It's our biggest organ. It's got all kinds of implications for our health. And I want to thank you for having shared these stories with us. But I bet you we have some people that might have some questions.
Never about the skin.
This is one of our areas where people are often curious and willing to ask. So if anyone has questions, we would welcome them. either online, I think we have people back there, or,
We already got a
oh, there we go.
taker.
Okay, and here we have a microphone for you.
Do we have to use sunscreen on a gray, cloudy day?
Great question, and the answer is yes. So that was amazing. So clouds will weed out ultraviolet B radiation. They don't block out ultraviolet A radiation, which is, in my opinion, scarier because it really does, unless you get a lot of it, it does not burn. So you have no idea you're getting exposure, but it penetrates deeper into the skin, so it's going to age your skin faster. It also means it's going to interfere with your local immune system, which can have huge implications. For example, if you are someone who gets oral herpes infections, fever blisters, it can wake those up much easier. But also, of course, skin cancer being the most concerning. So I think the good rule of thumb is every day is a sunscreen day. I think you can make it simple. I think most people use a facial moisturizer, which is important too. There are so many products that cover both, so you're not layer caking. You wash your face in the morning, pat dry, keep it a little damp to trap that moisture in there, and then put a thin layer of facial moisturizer with sunscreen. Great question, thank you.
You said that changes in temperature was bad for sensitive skin, but it's often 90 degrees outside, and then you go into an office, and it's not just, a little bit air conditioned, but sometimes it's just freezing cold. What can people do about this?
Right, I think we can only control so much, and I think there are shifts. I would say the shift from hot to cold, less so, and there is some clinical data showing why some products, so there are a lot of products that are marketed for sensitive skin, and a lot of people sensitive say, nope, they make my sensitive skin worse. But for some of them, they've shown that they have a cooling effect, and they actually looked at thermography of the skin to look at the temperature of the skin after applying it, and those people said, oh, it feels better. It was actually the cooling that may have done that. But to your point, going from super hot to super cold, that very quick shift can set those nerves off. I wish I had a great answer for you. I really don't. I think it's easing in. I think that sometimes it's going to be unavoidable. My hope is that we have products that can mitigate that. That if you have to do that, there is some buffering effect to that nature. But as of right now, I really don't have a great answer. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I would agree with you on that. And there are actually conditions, there are medical conditions that are set off by cold. For example, cold urticaria, hives that are come out from cold, which actually, if you have enough cold, can be life-threatening. I agree. And one of the ways I've addressed that in those circumstances where someone says, I can't go to work because it's so uncomfortable, I have written letters of medical necessity to either have a space heater or to hopefully change the temperature. But you're right. We can only control so much, and I agree there has to be some purposefulness in how an environment is kept to address everyone's needs.
I have a story relative to that. I spent about 15 years in Houston, Texas, and I will tell you that I've never been so cold in my life as the first summer I spent in Houston, Texas, when it was 110 degrees outside and 99% humidity, because the blazes kept at about 55 degrees throughout the city. It's really astonishing. So I think that's a cultural thing that Dr. Friedman's not going to be able to fix for us, regrettably, but we all should be mindful of that. I agree with you. Yes, next question.
Hi, thank you for the fantastic talk, by the way. So my question was about earlier, we were talking about the sensitive skin, and then it was like greater than 70% of people report that they experience sensitive skin. So I was wondering what the definition of sensitive skin was, because I would assume that, sensitive could be pretty subjective.
So I actually wish I planted that question, so thank you for asking. So you're right. If you just said, hey, do you have sensitive skin? How do you really measure that? So there is a validated research tool called the Sensi Scale 10, which, as the name infers, there are 10 questions where you grade the severity of various features: burning, tingling, itching, pain, redness over a 3-day period. And to validate a tool like that, you have to use it in many different countries with many people. And so there's a cutoff of 13 or higher that if you score that, you're defined as some degree of sensitive skin. And then there are ranges for mild, moderate, and severe. So yeah, that's a great question. You can't just say, hey, you're sensitive. Yeah, I guess I am today. Sure, why not? And you'd be captured. So these people went through using this validated tool to define whether they were sensitive or not.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. So I have a question. So like if people, I know in China, like some women will use like umbrella during the summer to prevent the sun. So like would that be possible? Like if people can use like physical sun protections, like we can in some way avoid using like chemical, like screen care product that might be healthier. What do you think?
Yeah,
thank you.
so a physical block is going to be better than anything. And actually that term sunblock has kind of moved away because nothing 100% blocks the sun. So even if you had an SPF 1 million, you still would not block 100% of UVB. It's impossible. So to your point, something that physically blocks out the sun, clothing, hats, sunglasses, an umbrella, is absolutely going to be more effective than a sunscreen. I guess my approach is why limit yourself? I mean, both have their places, both work through different mechanisms, and there is some evidence that ultraviolet radiation can still get through clothing. Actually, that study I mentioned with CBD, in the group that wasn't treated, but was, we actually didn't even shine light on their skin. We still took samples of their skin in a sun-protected area. Some of them still had that DNA damage on an area that should never have been exposed to the sun. Now, granted, the clinical part of this was done in Miami, so all right, fine, maybe those areas were exposed in Miami, always in Miami, but most of them weren't. And so that tells us that this injurious light is still getting through, whether it be clothing, maybe even an umbrella. But I will tell you, the umbrella material, I would have a hard time believing it's getting through versus a thin piece of clothing. So the degree of how tightly woven clothing is dictates how well it will protect you from the sun. There's clothing that has UPF, which refers to clothing potential to block sunlight. But no, I completely agree. If one day I'm walking into work and everyone's sunny and has an umbrella, I'm like, I'm going to turn in for the day. I did my job, so. I'm just kidding. I'll still see patients.
Very good. Yeah, I had one question about the stat you gave relative to young people with melanoma.
Yep.
And sort of brings me back to childhood sun exposure. And I'm wondering if you have specific recommendations relative to the risks that come for sun exposure in the little ones, because many of us have babies or grandbabies out there, and they like to be out in the sun.
Great question. So from 0 to 6 months, we are technically not supposed to use sunscreen, even the minerals. I think pediatricians hate it when us adult, medical doctors or dermatologists say, oh, they're just little adults. They're not. And the skin is very true to that. So the thickness of the skin, the acidity of the skin is very different, especially in that early period. And so that's 100% pure umbrellas or clothing. After that, I do recommend the minerals. These minerals are inert, meaning they do not cause any reactivity. They're goopy, they're gross, they stain your clothing, they get over on everything, but they're not gonna cause irritation, they're not gonna cause an allergic reaction or irritant reaction, and they work. Just good luck at bath time. But I think the time point where you might transition to a chemical sunscreen is going to be very dependent on the child, in the sense that if they have a primary skin problem like eczema, those products will be more irritating. But I think when you start to get like 4, 5, 6, you can start to use those chemical sunscreens, probably even earlier. But I would say in the first 2 years of life, you're safest using the minerals. And honestly, if you're more comfortable, there's no reason not to, because they come as creams, sprays, sticks, lots of flavors. But yeah, I think the adherence part is a little harder. But for those grandkids, they can't really stop you from putting it on them. I have 10 and 12-year-olds. They have to do it. If I try, they're faster than I am. So, but at that age, I think you can kind of force them to use the thicker stuff.
Very good, thank you. Did we have another question? Oh, that's okay, yes.
How do you feel about preventative Botox or baby Botox? It's like very prominent in social media right now. I didn't know if the science supported that.
Yeah, so it is kind of simple science in the sense if we compare our skin to a leather jacket, right? So you get a brand new leather jacket, it's beautiful, it's soft, oh, I love it, I want to show it off, but not really wear it or get anything on it. The more you wear it, you start to see lines, usually perpendicular to the movement. And that's the same with our skin. So for example, our forehead muscle goes up and down, the lines go this way. And so if you don't wear your jacket or you don't use it much, those lines don't happen. The same is true for our skin. Take everything else out. If you're accounting for sun exposure that can cause fine lines and wrinkles, if you're doing all the right stuff, certainly limiting motion will help prevent fine lines and wrinkles. So yes, there is evidence that starting early can help prevent. The question is when, and we don't really know. And then with baby Botox, in terms of like really dilute amounts, I don't think there's enough evidence to say this is the perfect way to do it. And I would argue a lot of people have their own way of doing it. And that's where I think experience, having your finger on the pulse of what's new, which obviously at academic center, we have to. We have residents and medical students constantly around us. God forbid we don't know the answer. And so it's a great push to always be on top of things, which is why I think getting your care at academic center is certainly different than elsewhere, and especially one that really encourages this pursuit of academic excellence. But no, I think it makes a lot of sense. I just can't say what line in the sand in terms of when to start, but there is evidence that it can help prevent.
Very good. I don't see any more questions. Oh, we do. One more question. Okay.
Is there a safe exposure limit to sunshine? And why I'm asking is, wintry day, it's nice to be in the sun for a little while. Is there any study or anything that will tell what is the exposure limit?
So it's a good question. I think it depends on what context. So I think historically we kind of equate sun exposure with vitamin D. That's one of the complaints against sunscreen. Like, oh, I need my vitamin D. And my response to that is like, well, if I put vitamin C in cigarettes, would you start smoking? No, you would take a pill, you would drink orange juice. But I think to that point, there have been some studies looking at what is the bare minimum of sunlight you would need, for example, to make pre-vitamin D in your skin. And one of these studies actually came out of, I want to say, somewhere in Russia, where they were seeing a lot of rickets, so a lot of vitamin D deficiency, bone problems. And they found that literally took minutes of a sun lamp to really get that pre-vitamin D in the skin. So we know you don't need a lot, but if you're using like we do to treat certain conditions, it's going to be very tailored to that condition. But we're talking about one wavelength, not the entire sun. We use one wavelength of ultraviolet B radiation for a certain amount of time, knowing full well that the light bulb is this far away from the person and they're going to be in there for a certain amount of time. So I think that the answer is yeah, maybe yes, in that depending on what you're thinking about, it could be safe, but it has to be very well controlled. But even then, like any medicine where there are adverse events, there can be adverse events. There could be burning. Cumulative exposure, even at small amounts, can increase the risk for skin cancer. So it's about pro and con. Is the value of doing that exposure outweighing the risk of what could possibly come next? I hope that answered the question.
Very good.
Yes, sir.
Yes, there we go. Okay, well, Dr. Friedman, I want to thank you for this really informative
pleasure.
and fun event.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we have some
got a couple
online.
minutes.
Okay, we have a couple minutes. Sure.
Yes, we just have some, people are very interested. So one question is from someone who says, I have very dark skin. Should I use sunscreen?
Yes, you should. I think the harder question would be, which one should I use? I think we are now in an age where there is some purposeful design of certain sunscreens. I think there is some language that's helpful. So when we think about the mineral sunscreens, terms like ultrafine, microfine, refers to the utilization of either micro, which is a millionth of a meter, or nano, a billionth of a meter, size particles of zinc and titanium. There was some concern way back when that, oh my God, these get into your skin and they'll kill you. And no, they're actually safe. Actually, in Europe, the EU has mandated that, yes, you have to put it on the bottle, but they consider it safe so long as you don't eat or inhale them. So please don't do that with your sunscreens. So I think it's about finding one that when you put it on, it rubs in. And the smaller those particles get, the less likely they will scatter visible light, seeing that white color, but they still scatter ultraviolet radiation, which is further down, smaller on that wavelength. So visible light's here, ultraviolet radiation's over here. So if you make something really small, you won't see it, but it still does its job. And then there are the chemical absorbers, which depending on their formula could rub in. But my advice when it comes to someone with darker skin wanting to try and find a sunscreen, samples are really helpful, and do a test spot or do several. You can do several lines on your arm, rub it in, see what rubs in best. I do actually want to give a shout out to one of our voluntary faculty members, Dr. Adeline Kickham, who has a really great social media page where she actually tests out sunscreens on her skin to show what it looks like on darker skin. And she's been doing this for some time. I can't remember the handle offhand, but if you search for her name, you can probably find her.
Great. We have another question here. Someone's asking, is there a benefit to hybrid sunscreens that use a combination of
great
mineral
question.
and chemical ingredients?
I swear I didn't plant these. Yes, so in an ideal world, your sunscreen would have multiple filters in it for several reasons. So even there are ones that have multiple organic, which is kind of a weird term for the chemical sunscreens. And the thing is, if you have multiple in there, you need less of each, which face value, that means there's less potential for irritation from each one. But there have been some studies showing that when you mix several sunscreens together and then throw in the minerals, that it's not like a SPF of 5 of one, 7 of another equals 12. It ends up more being like 14.6. And they actually work together, that when you have multiple, they actually protect each other from getting stuck in either an excited state, which is why they kind of peter out and you need to reapply every 2 hours. And the minerals can definitely do that by scattering off the ultraviolet radiation. So hybrid sunscreens, absolutely, I think multiple ingredients works better than having a single ingredient.
Great. Someone else in the chat is asking about coconut oil and if it's good for your skin.
You may be. So I think, so you have to, thinking about coconut oil not being treated like a cosmeceutical, or anything the FDA would look at from a skin application perspective, there are going to be some limitations. This is going to be USDA, so it's a food source. So if you are getting something that's not organic, there could be some other players that come along for the ride. So contaminants that can be bad for your skin. There actually is some evidence that coconut oil can be helpful for eczema. It also can help things penetrate the skin better. Actually, those studies I mentioned with some of those nanoparticles, cannabinoids, the vehicle we used for some of them was actually coconut oil. So I actually work a lot with coconut oil. I like it, but you want to make sure it's organic. And also it's about where you apply it. I don't love it for the scalp, but I think for the body it's absolutely fine as long as it's not contaminated with anything.
Great. We have one additional question asking about how often sunscreen should be reapplied, which I think you mentioned 2 hours, and also what is the maximum SPF for sunscreens beyond which it's not efficacious?
So I'll also add to the other is if you get out of the pool or you rinse off or you wipe off, you should reapply after that. And also sunscreens are only water resistant up to 80 minutes versus that 2 hour period. So theoretically, you should not need to go much higher than 50 because you're blocking about 98 point something%. The problem is to get that number, you would have to use an incredible amount of sunscreen, which no one does. So I think the value of the higher SPF sunscreens, and this has been shown in several studies, is that through dilution, you're still in that safe zone. So 100 becomes a 50, a 50 becomes a 25. So I think that's the value versus the higher you go, it's not like a 50 to 100, I can be in the sun longer and not reapply. There's really very little delta of changes so that you're not really putting enough on. So I think that's the value of the higher SPFs, at least for now.
Okay, you want to wrap it up for us? Our final
One more question. How often do you recommend getting your skin checked, and do you need to increase that frequency as you get older?
So typically it's once a year, and this is a very controversial topic because there is not evidence to say that everyone should get every year. There's also not evidence to say you shouldn't. I think the easier answer is someone who is at higher risk. What does that mean? Has multiple moles, family history of skin cancer, light eyes, light hair, a medical condition that lowers your immune system, because our immune system plays a role in fighting cancer, not just infections. So in general, it's once a year, but what I typically will do is I'll see someone for the first time, and depending on what I see, it may be next year, it may be in 2 years, it may be in 3 years. It only gets more frequent with a history of cancer, and actually the current guidelines is if it's melanoma, you come in every 3 months for the first year, then every 6 months thereafter, and then back to a year if you don't find anything. With non-melanoma skin cancers like basal cell and squamous cell, technically it's supposed to be once a year, but I really err on the side of comfort for the patient. So if a patient's like, hey, I just had my 3rd basal cell, can I come in 3 months? I'm not going to say, no way, no chance. I don't care what you think. I mean, so you do want to tailor it to the patient in terms of comfort, but also that enhances the patient-physician relationship and also adherence to good sun protection and other things that we do.
Very good. Well, that wraps it up. And thank you so much,
My
Dr.
pleasure.
Friedman. I'm
Cheers.
just really proud to have you as one of our chairs.
Thank you.
There we go. Very nice.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Enjoy your afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Please make sure that you pick up a bag on your way out.